Some moments change everything, and Debbie White was about to create one that would destroy 3 lives forever. The Rainbow Room's crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across 300 of Manhattan's elite as Christoph Niesen adjusted his platinum cufflinks for the final time. In exactly 12 minutes, he would marry Nina Lilly, the woman who had transformed his world from cold corporate success into something beautiful and meaningful. The tech billionaire's empire stretched across Silicon Alley like a digital kingdom, his company's algorithms powering everything from Wall Street trading platforms to social media networks used by millions worldwide. But none of his technological achievements compared to the kingdom he'd found in Nina's arms, a realm where profit margins meant less than morning coffee together, where board meetings mattered less than quiet conversations about changing the world. "You ready for this, brother?" whispered his best man, James Patterson, straightening Christoph's bow tie with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly. James had been acting strangely for weeks, distracted and nervous, but Christoph had attributed it to wedding stress and the pressure of managing their pharmaceutical acquisition, while Christoph was focused on the ceremony. Christoph's steel-grey eyes softened as he watched Nina's silhouette through the frosted glass doors. Even as a shadow, she commanded attention, the confident posture of a woman who'd argued cases before the Supreme Court, the graceful movement of someone who'd grown up dancing in her mother's Brooklyn brownstone. "I've been ready since the day I met her at Columbia." She was destroying some poor law student's argument in constitutional law, and I knew I had to marry her. "She does have a way of making everyone else feel intellectually inadequate," James said, but his usual warmth was missing. His joke fell flat, landing between them like a stone. The processional began with the soft strains of a string quartet playing Pachelbel's canon. First came the bridesmaids in flowing champagne silk, their smiles radiant against the Manhattan skyline, visible through floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking panorama of Central Park and the Upper West Side. The city that never sleeps spread out below them like a glittering carpet woven from dreams and ambition, and Christoph felt like he owned it all, but more importantly, he felt like he was about to share it with the only person who could make it meaningful. Each bridesmaid carried a bouquet of white roses mixed with eucalyptus, their stems wrapped in silk ribbon that matched their dresses. As they took their positions, the afternoon light caught the subtle gold threading in their gowns, making them shimmer like ethereal beings. These were Nina's closest friends, from law school, from her firm, from the civil rights organizations where she volunteered. Strong, accomplished women who'd built their own empires and chosen to celebrate Nina's happiness. The flower girl, Nina's 6-year-old niece Sophia, scattered rose petals with the serious concentration of someone performing brain surgery. She wore a miniature version of the bridesmaids' dresses and had practiced her walk down the aisle for weeks, determined to be perfect for Aunt Nina's special day. The guests smiled indulgently as she paused halfway down the aisle to wave at her grandparents, her gap-toothed grin melting even the most hardened hearts. Then she appeared. Nina Lilly moved down the aisle like poetry in motion, her grandmother's vintage lace gown flowing behind her like captured moonlight. The dress had been worn by 3 generations of Lilly women, each adding their own touch. Nina's great-grandmother's seed pearls at the neckline, her grandmother's silk train, her mother's delicate beadwork at the bodice. Her dark skin glowed against the pristine white fabric, and her natural hair was adorned with fresh gardenias that filled the air with their sweet, intoxicating fragrance. As a civil rights attorney who'd fought discrimination cases all the way to the Supreme Court, Nina commanded respect wherever she went. She'd argued landmark cases that had changed federal policy, had stared down senators and CEOs and federal judges with equal confidence. But today, she was simply a woman in love, her professional armor replaced by vintage lace and vulnerable joy. Dr. Evelyn Lilly walked beside her daughter, radiant in navy blue silk, tears of joy streaming down her cheeks. She'd raised Nina as a single mother after Nina's father died in military service, and this moment represented the culmination of decades of sacrifice and love. As they reached the altar, she kissed Nina's cheek and whispered, "Your father would be so proud," before taking her seat in the front row. Christoph's throat tightened as their eyes met across the expanse of marble and crystal. 5 years together, and she still made his heart race like a teenager's first crush. When she reached the altar, he took her trembling hands in his, feeling the slight callus on her ring finger from years of writing legal briefs, the soft warmth that had comforted him through countless difficult nights. "You look absolutely breathtaking," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "And you look like trouble," she whispered back, her smile electric enough to power the entire Manhattan grid. "Good thing I like trouble. In fact, I'm thinking of making a career out of it." Their private jokes, the language of love they'd developed over years of shared experiences, felt sacred in this moment. Around them, 300 guests sat in reverent silence. But for Christoph and Nina, the world had narrowed to just the two of them. Reverend Michael Thompson, Nina's childhood pastor from Brooklyn, who'd baptized her and confirmed her and counseled her through her teenage doubts, opened his leather-bound Bible with hands that had married hundreds of couples over 3 decades. His deep voice carried the weight of tradition and the warmth of personal affection as he began the ceremony that would unite not just 2 people, but 2 families, 2 futures, 2 hearts that had found their perfect match. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today in the sight of God, and these witnesses to unite Christoph Alexander Neeson and Nina Marie Lilly in holy matrimony. Marriage is not a contract to be entered into lightly, but a sacred covenant that reflects the love between Christ and his church." The ceremony flowed like a dream, choreographed by angels. They'd written their own vows, spending weeks crafting words that could somehow capture the magnitude of their love. When Christoph spoke about Nina being the light that showed me life was about more than profits and power, the compass that pointed me toward my true north, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Hardened Wall Street executives reached for their handkerchiefs, and Nina's mother sobbed openly in the front row. Nina's vows about finding home in his arms, discovering that love isn't about perfection, but about choosing each other every day, especially on the days when it's hard, left even the most cynical guests believing in fairy tales again. Her voice never wavered, even as tears streamed down her cheeks, because these weren't just pretty words. They were promises forged in the fire of real relationship, tested by long-distance periods when Christoph traveled for business and Nina worked 100-hour weeks on landmark cases. The exchange of rings felt sacred, each promise weighted with the gravity of forever. Christoph's ring was simple platinum, engraved with coordinates marking the spot where he'd first told Nina he loved her. Nina's engagement ring, a flawless 5-carat diamond from Tiffany, surrounded by smaller stones representing each year they'd been together, caught the light like captured starfire. "If anyone has any reason why these 2 should not be joined in marriage, speak now or forever hold your peace," Reverend Thompson announced, his voice echoing through the cavernous space like a challenge thrown down to the universe itself. The silence stretched like eternity, pregnant with possibility and promise. Christoph squeezed Nina's hands, sharing a knowing smile that said they'd made it. They'd survived the stress and planning and family drama and corporate demands. They were finally here, finally ready to become husband and wife in front of everyone who mattered to them. "I do." The voice cut through the silence like a blade through silk, sharp and deadly and irrevocable. Every head turned toward the bridal party like a field of sunflowers following a dark sun, where Debbie White stood frozen, her bouquet of white roses trembling in her manicured hands like a weapon she wasn't sure how to use. The collective intake of breath from 300 guests created a sound like wind rushing through a cathedral. Time seemed to slow, each second stretching into infinity as the words hung in the perfumed air like poison gas. "I'm sorry. Did someone speak?" Reverend Thompson asked, his voice carefully controlled, clearly hoping he'd misheard. In 30 years of performing weddings, he'd never actually had someone object. The phrase was tradition, a legal formality from centuries past, not an invitation for drama. Debbie White stepped forward, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor like gunshots in the sudden, suffocating silence. Her platinum blonde hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, but her green eyes held something dark and desperate that transformed her beautiful face into a mask of barely controlled panic. She was Nina's oldest friend, the woman who'd helped plan this entire wedding, who'd held Nina's hair during college hangovers and celebrated every professional victory. She'd been the maid of honor at Nina's parents' vow renewal ceremony, the godmother figure to Nina's nephew, the person Nina trusted more than anyone except the man she was about to marry. "I said I do," Debbie announced, her voice growing stronger with each word, as if she was drawing courage from the destruction she was about to unleash. "I have a reason why they shouldn't get married." The murmur that rippled through the crowd sounded like distant thunder, a storm approaching fast and deadly. Nina's mother gasped audibly from the front row, her hand flying to her chest. Christoph felt the blood drain from his face as he stared at his fiancée's best friend, the woman who'd toasted their happiness just hours ago at the rehearsal dinner. Victoria Ashworth, seated in the third row, pulled out her phone with the instincts of someone who'd spent years documenting evidence. In the fourth row, Rebecca Patterson gripped her husband James's arm so tightly that he winced. Somewhere in the back, a society reporter from the Times was already typing furiously on her phone. "Debbie," Nina whispered, her voice cracking like ice under pressure, "what are you doing?" The question hung in the air, but Debbie's response would shatter more than just the silence. She reached into her bouquet with shaking hands and pulled out a small white envelope, the kind used for thank you notes or final goodbye letters. "I'm pregnant," she announced, her words carrying clearly through the suddenly suffocating atmosphere, each syllable a nail in the coffin of Nina's perfect day. "And the father is Christoph Neeson." The Rainbow Room erupted into chaos that would make the front page of every gossip publication in the city by morning. Gasps turned to shouts, whispered speculation became open accusations, and the sudden scraping of chairs against marble filled the air as guests rose to their feet like spectators at a gladiatorial arena. Camera phones appeared like magic mushrooms after rain, capturing every agonizing second for social media immortality. Nina stumbled backward, as if she'd been physically struck, her bouquet falling to the floor in a cascade of broken petals and shattered dreams. The gardenias that had smelled so sweet moments before now seemed cloying, suffocating, a mockery of the innocence that had just died. "That's impossible," Christoph said, his voice hollow with shock that reverberated through his chest like a physical wound. "Debbie, that's completely impossible." "Is it?" Debbie asked, tears now streaming down her cheeks, ruining her perfect makeup and revealing the raw desperation beneath the polished surface. "Tell her about Atlanta, Christoph. Tell her about the pharmaceutical conference last month. Tell her about the hotel room at the Ritz-Carlton." Nina's dark eyes darted between her best friend and her almost husband, like a trapped animal looking for escape. The betrayal was written across her face in letters of fire, each moment of realization another crack in her breaking heart. "What conference?" Nina's voice rose an octave, the courtroom attorney's instincts kicking in even as her personal world collapsed. "You told me you were in Boston for tech meetings. You showed me the itinerary." The lie hung in the air like poison gas, visible and deadly. Christoph's mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening while his heart hammered against his ribs like a caged bird. He had been in Atlanta, but not for any conference. He'd flown there to meet with MedTech Solutions, a small biotech firm he'd kept secret to avoid stock speculation that could tank the deal before it closed. "Nina, I can explain," he began, but his words were swallowed by the growing chaos. "Explain what?" Nina's voice could have shattered crystal. "Explain how my best friend is pregnant with my fiancé's baby. Explain how you lied to me about where you were. Explain how everything I thought I knew about my life is apparently a lie." "The baby is yours, Christoph," Debbie continued, her voice gaining strength from Nina's pain, as if drawing power from the destruction she was creating. "I have the ultrasound pictures, the medical records. I'm 12 weeks along." 12 weeks. Christoph's mathematical mind automatically calculated backward, the numbers spinning in his head like a slot machine landing on bankruptcy. That would place conception right around the time he'd been in Atlanta, closing the most important deal of his career. But he'd never touched Debbie White. He'd barely even spoken to her beyond polite conversation at dinner parties and charity events. "You're lying," he said, his voice deadly quiet in a way that made people step back involuntarily. The tech billionaire who could destroy companies with a single decision was emerging from beneath the groom's tender facade. "I don't know what game you're playing, but you're lying." "Am I?" Debbie reached into her purse and pulled out a folded sonogram image, holding it like a weapon. "Here's your son, Christoph. Or maybe you prefer not to acknowledge your children. Maybe you're the kind of man who abandons his responsibilities." The image fluttered to the ground between them like a fallen leaf or a death certificate for Nina's trust. She bent to pick it up, her wedding dress pooling around her like spilled milk, like innocence destroyed. When Nina looked at the sonogram, her face went ashen. The black and white image showed the unmistakable shape of a 12-week fetus, and the date stamp was clear and damning. "It's dated 6 weeks ago," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the crowd's growing murmur. "Debbie, you've been pregnant for 6 weeks and didn't tell me? Your best friend?" "I was waiting for the right moment," Debbie said, her voice breaking completely now, tears mixing with mascara to create dark rivers down her cheeks. "I didn't want to hurt you, Nina, but I couldn't let you marry him without knowing the truth about what kind of man he really is." The crowd pressed closer, their whispers growing louder, a Greek chorus of speculation and judgment. Someone in the back was already on their phone, probably alerting Page 6 and the Daily Mail. By tomorrow morning, this would be front-page news across 3 continents. "Security," Christoph called out, his voice cutting through the chaos like a knife through butter. "Clear the room, now." But the damage was done. As the guests reluctantly filed out, their shocked murmurs echoing off the walls like accusations, Christoph found himself alone with the 2 women who meant everything to him, one who might have betrayed him and one who definitely had. Nina stood slowly, the sonogram still clutched in her trembling hand like evidence in a murder trial. When she looked at Christoph, her eyes were already starting to harden into the expression he'd seen her wear in courtrooms when she was about to destroy someone's case piece by piece. "Is it true?" she asked simply, her voice carrying the weight of their entire relationship. "Nina, I swear to you on my mother's grave, on everything I hold sacred, I have never touched Debbie White. Not once, not ever. I've never been alone with her, never flirted with her, never even thought about her in that way." "But you were in Atlanta," Nina said, her courtroom training making her focus on the facts, the lies, the inconsistencies. "You lied about being in Boston. That was business. Business you couldn't tell your fiancé about." The hurt in her voice was like a physical blow. "Business so secret that you had to lie to the woman you claim to love." "Nina, please, you know me. You know I would never—" "I thought I knew you," Nina interrupted, her voice like ice forming over deep water. But apparently, I don't know you at all. Apparently the man I was about to marry is someone who lies about business trips and gets his fiancée's best friend pregnant." She pulled off her engagement ring, the 5-carat symbol of their love that he'd chosen after weeks of searching for something worthy of her, and placed it on the altar beside the fallen bouquet. The sound it made against the marble was like a gavel falling, like a death sentence being pronounced. "Nina, don't do this," Christoph pleaded, his composure finally cracking. "Don't let her destroy us. Don't let lies tear apart what we've built." "She didn't destroy us," Nina said, looking directly at Debbie, who was now sobbing openly. "You did, both of you did, and the worst part is that I have to find out on what should have been the happiest day of my life, in front of everyone we know." As Nina walked away, her wedding dress trailing behind her like broken dreams and shattered promises, Christoph felt his perfect world collapse around him like a house of cards in a hurricane. The woman he loved was gone, the friend he'd trusted had betrayed him, and somewhere in the distance, he could hear the clicking of camera phones capturing his downfall for viral posterity. But one thought kept echoing in his mind as he watched his bride disappear through the same doors where she'd appeared like an angel just minutes before. He knew with absolute, unshakable certainty that he had never slept with Debbie White, which meant either she was lying about the pregnancy, lying about him being the father, or something much more complicated and dangerous was going on. The question that would haunt him through the sleepless nights ahead was simple but terrifying. What was Debbie White really hiding, and who was pulling the strings behind this devastating performance? Chapter 2. Aftermath of Betrayal. In the brutal mathematics of scandal, one lie plus one truth still equals total destruction. 24 hours after the wedding that became Manhattan's most talked-about disaster, Christoph Niesen sat in his penthouse office overlooking Central Park, staring at his phone as if it might explode. The device hadn't stopped buzzing since yesterday's catastrophe, but he couldn't bring himself to answer another call from another reporter asking for a statement about his secret affair with his fiancée's best friend. The New York Post's headline that morning had been particularly vicious: "Tech Titan's wedding wrecked by baby bombshell." Below it, a photo captured the exact moment Debbie had made her announcement, Nina's face frozen in a mask of betrayal and disbelief. "Sir?" His assistant, Martha Rodriguez, knocked softly on his office door. "Your lawyers are here." Christoph looked up from the newspaper spread across his mahogany desk. His legal team, the best money could buy, filed in with grim expressions and thick briefcases. Leading them was Patricia Hoffman, senior partner at Hoffman, Klein and Associates, whose silver hair and steel demeanor had intimidated opponents for 3 decades. "Christoph," Patricia said, settling into the chair across from his desk, "we need to discuss damage control. Your stock price dropped 12% in after-hours trading yesterday." "I don't care about the stock price," Christoph said, his voice hoarse from a sleepless night. "I care about proving I'm innocent." "Are you?" The question came from David Chen, Patricia's associate, whose bluntness had served their firm well in criminal defense cases. "Of course I'm innocent!" Christoph exploded, then immediately regretted raising his voice. "I'm sorry. I've never even been alone with Debbie White, let alone slept with her." Patricia opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "We've started investigating Miss White's claims. The good news is that proving paternity will be straightforward once the baby is born. The bad news is that she seems to have medical documentation supporting her pregnancy timeline." "What about the father?" Christoph asked. "If it's not me, then who is it?" "That's what we need to find out," Patricia replied. "Meanwhile, we need to address the immediate crisis. Your board is calling an emergency meeting for this afternoon." Christoph's phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen and his heart stopped. It was a text from an unknown number. She's lying about everything. Meet me at Cafe Luna on 84th at 2 p.m. if you want the truth. Come alone." "Sir?" Martha's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Are you all right?" Christoph stared at the message, his mind racing. Who would know the truth about Debbie's pregnancy? And why were they reaching out to him anonymously? "I need to step out," he said abruptly, standing and grabbing his jacket. "Christoph, we haven't finished," Patricia began. "I'll be back in an hour," he said, already heading for the door. "Don't make any statements to the press until I return." Cafe Luna was a small Italian bistro tucked between a bookstore and a vintage clothing shop on the Upper West Side. It was the kind of place where people went to disappear, with dim lighting and small tables that encouraged whispered conversations. Christoph arrived 10 minutes early and chose a corner table with a clear view of the entrance. At exactly 2 p.m., a woman entered the cafe, scanning the room nervously. She was tall and elegant, with auburn hair pulled back in a severe bun and designer sunglasses that she didn't remove even indoors. She spotted Christoph and walked over, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. "Mr. Neeson?" she asked, sliding into the chair across from him. "You sent the text," he said. It wasn't a question. The woman nodded and finally removed her sunglasses, revealing tired brown eyes and stress lines that suggested she hadn't slept much lately either. "My name is Sarah Lilly. I'm Nina's older sister." Christoph's blood turned to ice. He'd heard about Sarah, but had never met her. Nina rarely spoke about her sister, and when she did, it was always with a mixture of love and frustration. Sarah had a history of making poor choices and dragging the family into drama. "What do you know about Debbie's pregnancy?" he asked directly. Sarah looked around nervously, then leaned forward. "Everything," she whispered. "I know everything because I'm the one who got her into this mess." "I don't understand." Sarah took a shaky breath. "Debbie isn't pregnant with your baby, Mr. Neeson. She's not even pregnant with a baby that's yours biologically. But she is pregnant, and she's desperate, and I'm the reason why." Christoph felt like he was trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. "Start from the beginning." 3 months ago, I was having an affair," Sarah said, her voice barely audible. "With someone I shouldn't have been with. Someone who's married, someone important. When I found out I was pregnant, I panicked. What does this have to do with Debbie? I went to Debbie for help. She's always been like family to us, and she's the only person I knew who could keep a secret. I was going to get an abortion, but then," Sarah paused, her hands shaking as she reached for her water glass. "But then what?" "The man I was having the affair with is someone you know, Mr. Neeson, someone you work with. When Debbie found out who the father was, she said she had a better idea." Christoph's mind raced through his business associates, trying to imagine which one would have an affair with Nina's sister. "Who?" "Your business partner," Sarah whispered. "James Patterson." The words hit Christoph like a physical blow. James Patterson, his best man, his closest friend, the person he trusted more than anyone except Nina. James, who was married to Rebecca, a sweet woman who'd struggled with infertility for years. "James," Christoph whispered. "You're having an affair with James?" "Had," Sarah corrected. "I ended it when I found out about the pregnancy. But Debbie, she said she could use the information to help both of us." "How?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "She knew about your acquisition of MedTech Solutions, the pharmaceutical company in Atlanta. She said if she could convince everyone that you were the father of my baby, she could blackmail you into giving her money for the child support, and I could disappear until I decided what to do about the pregnancy." The pieces were starting to come together, but the picture they formed was even worse than Christoph had imagined. "So, Debbie claimed she was pregnant with my baby, using your medical records." "Yes, she doctored the paperwork to make it look like she was the patient. She thought you'd pay her off quietly to make the scandal go away, and then, when there was no baby in 9 months, she'd claim she'd miscarried. But why destroy Nina's wedding? Why hurt her like that? Sarah's tears flowed freely now. I don't think she planned to do it at the wedding. I think she panicked when she realized you weren't going to pay her off without proof, so she decided to force your hand publicly. Christoph leaned back in his chair, overwhelmed by the scope of the betrayal. His best friend had been having an affair with his fiancée's sister. His fiancée's best friend had tried to blackmail him using false pregnancy claims. And Nina, beautiful, innocent Nina, was the victim of all of it. "Where's the real pregnancy test?" he asked. "Debbie has it," Sarah said, "along with all my medical records. She's been careful to keep everything that could expose the truth." "And where are you in all this?" Sarah looked down at her hands. "I'm still pregnant, still trying to decide what to do, still trying to figure out how to tell my family that I've ruined everything again." Christoph's phone buzzed with another message from the same unknown number. This time, it read, "Check your security cameras from last Tuesday. The truth is there." He showed the message to Sarah, who went pale. "Someone else knows," she whispered. "Who else could know about this?" "I don't know," Sarah said, gathering her purse. "But Mr. Neeson, you need to be careful. If someone else has evidence about what really happened, they might not want to help you. They might want to use it against all of us." As Sarah hurried out of the cafe, leaving Christoph alone with his racing thoughts, he realized that yesterday's wedding disaster might have been just the beginning. Someone was pulling strings behind the scenes, someone who knew all their secrets, and they weren't done playing their game yet. Chapter 3: Secrets in the Shadows. Truth has a way of hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to surface and destroy everything you thought you knew. Nina Lilly sat in her childhood bedroom in her mother's Brooklyn brownstone, staring at the pregnancy test she'd found hidden in Debbie's purse during the chaos after the wedding. The little plastic stick felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in her trembling hands. The date on the packaging was clear: 6 months ago, not 12 weeks as Debbie had claimed. Someone was lying, but Nina no longer knew who. The bedroom hadn't changed much since her high school days. The same lavender walls, the same bookshelf crammed with legal texts and classic literature, the same framed photograph of her and Debbie from their Columbia graduation. They'd been inseparable since childhood, two girls from different backgrounds who'd found in each other the sister neither had been born with. Well, Nina did have a sister, but Sarah had always been the problem child. Beautiful, charismatic Sarah, who'd dropped out of New York University to pursue modeling, who'd dated married men and borrowed money she never repaid, who'd break your heart while smiling sweetly and making you feel like it was your fault. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Nina, honey, can I come in?" Her mother, Dr. Evelyn Lilly, entered carrying a steaming mug of chamomile tea. At 62, she still carried herself with the grace that had made her one of the first black women to establish a successful pediatric practice in Park Slope. Her silver hair was pulled back in an elegant chignon, and her dark eyes, so much like Nina's, radiated the same calm competence that had soothed countless anxious parents over the years. "How are you holding up, sweetheart?" Nina accepted the tea gratefully, inhaling the familiar scent that had comforted her through childhood nightmares and teenage heartbreaks. "I don't know what to believe anymore, Mama." Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed, her weight making the old mattress dip. "Tell me about this pregnancy test." Nina held up the stick. "I found it in Debbie's purse when she left it behind yesterday. Look at the date." Evelyn took the test and examined it carefully with the same methodical attention she'd given to medical charts for 30 years. "This is dated March 15th. That's 6 months ago, not 3 months. Which means either Debbie was pregnant 6 months ago and lost the baby, or—" Nina trailed off, unable to voice the alternative. Or she's been planning this for much longer than anyone realizes. Nina set down her tea and pulled out her phone. I need to call her. I need answers. Have you tried reaching her since yesterday? Her phone goes straight to voicemail. Her apartment doorman says she hasn't been home. It's like she vanished. Evelyn studied her daughter's face. What about Christoph? Have you spoken to him? He's been calling and texting non-stop. But Mom, he lied to me about being in Atlanta. If he can lie about something small like a business trip, what else has he been lying about? Or, Evelyn said gently, maybe there's more to the story than what happened at that altar. Nina's phone rang, and she glanced at the screen. It's James Patterson, Christoph's business partner. Answer it, Evelyn encouraged. Maybe he can shed some light on this. Nina accepted the call. Hello, James. Nina, thank God. James's voice was strained, almost panicked. I need to talk to you, in person. It's about Debbie and what happened yesterday. James, I don't think... There's something you need to know about your sister Sarah, he interrupted. Something that changes everything. The blood drained from Nina's face so quickly that Evelyn reached out to steady her. What about Sarah? I can't say over the phone. Can you meet me at Central Park, the Shakespeare Garden, in an hour? Nina looked at her mother, who nodded encouragingly. I'll be there. After hanging up, Nina sat in silence for a moment. Why would James know something about Sarah? Evelyn's expression grew troubled. I've been wondering about Sarah lately. She's been acting strangely for months, secretive, evasive, and she wasn't at your wedding. She said she had the flu. Your sister has never missed an important family event for illness in her entire life. That girl once attended your cousin's bar mitzvah with a broken leg. Nina stood and moved to her dresser, pulling out jeans and a sweater. As she changed out of the silk pajamas she'd been wearing since yesterday, she caught sight of herself in the mirror. Her eyes were red-rimmed from crying, her hair was a mess, and she looked nothing like the confident attorney who'd argued cases before federal judges. Mom, what if everything I thought I knew about the people I love is wrong? Evelyn came up behind her and placed gentle hands on her daughter's shoulders. Then you deal with the truth, whatever it is. You've never run from a fight in your life, Nina Marie Lilly. Don't start now. Central Park's Shakespeare Garden was a hidden oasis of tranquility in the heart of Manhattan. Tucked away near the Delacorte Theatre, it featured flowers and herbs mentioned in the Bard's plays, with small plaques bearing relevant quotes scattered throughout the winding paths. It was the kind of place lovers went for quiet conversations and marriage proposals. Nina found James Patterson sitting on a bench near the rosemary bushes, his head in his hands. He looked terrible. His usually immaculate suit was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, and he had the appearance of a man who hadn't slept in days. James, she called softly. He looked up, and Nina was shocked by the raw anguish in his eyes. James had always been the steady one, the reliable partner who balanced Christoph's intensity with calm pragmatism. Now he looked like a man on the verge of complete breakdown. Nina, I'm so sorry, he said, standing as she approached. I'm so fucking sorry for everything. She'd never heard James curse before. What's going on? He gestured for her to sit beside him on the bench. I need to tell you something that's going to hurt. About Sarah, about me, about everything that happened yesterday. Nina's stomach knotted. Just say it. I've been having an affair with your sister, James said, the words tumbling out like he'd been holding them back with physical force. For 4 months, she's pregnant, and the baby is mine. The words hit Nina like a slap. She stared at James, trying to process what he'd just told her. Sarah's pregnant? With your baby? Yes. But Debbie said she was pregnant with Christoph's baby. James rubbed his face with his hands. That's the thing. I think Debbie found out about Sarah and me, and she's using it somehow. Sarah's been terrified about the pregnancy, terrified about what it would do to your family if they found out, terrified about what it would do to my marriage. Nina thought about Rebecca Patterson, James's wife of 8 years. Sweet, devoted Rebecca, who'd been trying to get pregnant for so long that she'd undergone 3 rounds of IVF. Rebecca doesn't know. Number. And if this comes out, it'll destroy her. It'll destroy everything. So you think Debbie is what? Blackmailing you? I think she's blackmailing all of us, James said. Think about it. She disrupts your wedding with a lie about Christoph. She knows about Sarah and me. She probably knows other secrets too. The question is, what does she want? Nina pulled out her phone and showed James the pregnancy test. I found this in her purse. It's dated 6 months ago. James examined the test, his frown deepening. This doesn't make sense. If she was pregnant 6 months ago, where's the baby? Did she lose it? Did she... I don't know, Nina said, but someone's been planning this for a long time. A jogger passed by, and both of them fell silent until the person was out of earshot. The afternoon sun was starting to set, casting long shadows through the garden. James, where was Christoph really when he said he was in Boston? Atlanta. He was acquiring a pharmaceutical company called MedTech Solutions. He kept it quiet because he didn't want to affect stock prices before the deal was finalized. So he wasn't lying about business. Number and Nina ... James hesitated. I've known Christoph for 15 years. I've seen him with dozens of women before he met you. He's never ever cheated on anyone he was serious about, and he's never been more serious about anyone than he is about you. Nina felt tears threatening again. Then why won't he just take a paternity test and prove the baby isn't his? Because he's scared, James said quietly. He's scared that even if he proves his innocence, the damage to your relationship is already done. He's scared that you'll never trust him again. Nina's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Your sister is in danger. Meet me at the Metropolitan Museum, Egyptian Wing, tomorrow at noon. Come alone and don't tell anyone about this message. She showed the text to James, whose face went pale. Someone else knows about Sarah, he whispered. Who could know all of this? I don't know, but Nina, what if this isn't just about money? What if someone is orchestrating all of this for a different reason? As they sat in the growing darkness of the Shakespeare garden, surrounded by flowers and herbs that had inspired tales of love and betrayal for centuries, Nina realized that her perfect life had become a tragedy worthy of the bard himself. And the final act was still to come. Chapter 4. The investigation begins. When your life becomes a crime scene, everyone you've ever trusted becomes a suspect. Security footage doesn't lie, but it sure as hell can confuse the truth out of existence. Christoph Niesen sat in the basement security office of his Manhattan building, watching video clips that made him question everything he thought he knew about the people in his life. Marcus Chen, head of building security, fast-forwarded through Tuesday's footage. Here, he said, pointing at the timestamp. 3:47 p.m., your private elevator. On the grainy black and white screen, Christoph watched Debbie White enter his private elevator, the one that only went to his penthouse office and required a special key card. She was carrying a manila envelope and looking nervous, constantly checking her phone. I never gave her access to that elevator, Christoph said, leaning closer to the monitor. How did she get up there? That's what we need to figure out, Marcus replied, pulling up another angle. Look at this. The second camera showed Debbie in his outer office, talking animatedly with someone off camera. Her body language was aggressive, almost threatening, and she kept waving the manila envelope like a weapon. Can you see who she's talking to? Marcus shook his head. The angle's wrong, but watch this. He advanced the footage by 10 minutes. Now Debbie was leaving, and she looked satisfied, almost smug. The manila envelope was gone. "She left something," Christoph murmured. "Or someone gave her something." His phone rang, and Patricia Hoffman's name appeared on the screen. "Patricia, tell me you have good news." "Mixed news," his lawyer replied. "I've been digging into Debbie White's background. Did you know she's filed for bankruptcy twice in the past 5 years?" "No, I didn't know that." "And her photography business is about to be evicted from her Soho studio for non-payment of rent. She owes about $40,000 in various debts." Christoph felt a piece of the puzzle click into place. "So she needs money." "Desperately. But here's the interesting part. Someone paid off her credit card debt last month. $23,000, paid in full from an anonymous account. Someone's backing her. That's what it looks like. And Christoph, the payment was made 3 days before your wedding." Marcus pointed at the screen again. "Mr. Neeson, you need to see this." He'd pulled up footage from the building's main entrance. The timestamp showed last Thursday, 2 days before the wedding. A figure in a dark coat and baseball cap entered the building, keeping their face carefully turned away from the cameras. "Professional," Marcus commented. "Whoever this is knows how to avoid surveillance." But as the figure moved through the lobby, their coat shifted, revealing something that made Christoph's blood run cold. A distinctive silver bracelet, one he'd seen many times before. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "I know that bracelet." An hour later, Christoph stood outside Rebecca Patterson's apartment building on the Upper East Side, his heart pounding. The bracelet belonged to Rebecca, James's wife, the woman who'd been like a sister to him for years. But what would Rebecca be doing sneaking into his building in disguise? The doorman recognized him and waved him through without question. Rebecca lived in 14B, a cozy 2-bedroom that she and James had bought when they first got married. It was filled with the kind of warm touches that Rebecca was famous for: hand-knitted throws, fresh flowers, photographs of family and friends covering every available surface. Rebecca answered the door in yoga pants and an oversized sweater, her blonde hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked surprised to see him. "Christoph, what are you doing here? Is everything okay? Can I come in? We need to talk." Something in his tone must have alarmed her, because her welcoming smile faded. "Of course. Is it about James? He's been acting so strangely lately." She led him into the living room, where wedding magazines were scattered across the coffee table. Christoph realized with a pang that Rebecca and James had been planning to renew their vows for their upcoming 10th anniversary. "Rebecca, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." She settled into her favorite armchair, tucking her legs under her. "You're scaring me. Were you in my building last Thursday afternoon?" The color drained from Rebecca's face so quickly that Christoph thought she might faint. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, like a fish gasping for air. "How did you know?" she finally whispered. "Security cameras." "Rebecca, what were you doing there?" Tears filled her eyes, and she covered her face with her hands. "I followed her," she said, her voice muffled. "I followed Debbie White." "Why?" Rebecca looked up, and Christoph was shocked by the pain in her expression. "Because I knew she was meeting with someone connected to James. I've known for weeks that he's having an affair." The admission hung in the air between them like a toxic cloud. Christoph felt sick. James was his closest friend, his business partner, his confidant. The idea that he'd been cheating on Rebecca, sweet, loyal Rebecca who'd stood by him through everything, was almost too painful to process. "How did you know?" "Credit card statements, hotel charges in the middle of the day, perfume on his clothes that wasn't mine, phone calls that he'd take in the other room." Rebecca's voice was getting stronger now, anger beginning to replace the hurt. "I hired a private investigator." "Rebecca!" "Her name is Sarah Lilly," Rebecca continued, "Nina's sister. Can you believe that? He's having an affair with Nina's sister while you're planning to marry Nina. It's like some sick joke. Christoph sank onto the couch, overwhelmed. The private investigator, what did he find? Rebecca stood and walked to a small desk in the corner of the room. She pulled out a thick manila folder and handed it to him. Everything. Hotel records, photographs, financial transactions. They've been meeting twice a week for 4 months. Christoph opened the folder and immediately wished he hadn't. The photographs were damning. James and Sarah entering hotels, sitting intimately in restaurant booths, James's hand on Sarah's very obviously pregnant belly. "She's pregnant," Rebecca said, her voice breaking, "with my husband's baby, while I've been spending thousands of dollars on fertility treatments, trying to give him the child he wants. He's been making babies with some other woman." "Rebecca, I'm so sorry. But here's the thing that doesn't make sense," she continued, wiping her eyes. "According to the investigator, Sarah Lilly has been telling people that she's not pregnant with James's baby. She's been telling people the father is someone else entirely." Christoph looked up from the photographs. "What?" "The investigator overheard her on the phone with someone last week. She said, and I quote, 'Don't worry about James finding out. As far as everyone knows, the baby isn't his.'" "Who was she talking to?" "That's what I was trying to find out when I followed Debbie to your building. I think Debbie and Sarah are working together on something. I think they're planning something that involves both you and James." Christoph's phone buzzed with a text message. "Stop digging or people will get hurt. This is your only warning." He showed the message to Rebecca, who went pale again. "Someone knows we're talking," she whispered. "Rebecca, listen to me very carefully. I think you and I are being manipulated. I think someone is using all of our secrets against us." "But who? And why?" Before Christoph could answer, they heard a key turning in the front door. Rebecca's eyes went wide with panic. "James," she whispered, "he's not supposed to be home for hours." The door opened and James Patterson walked in, stopping short when he saw Christoph on the couch and his wife holding a folder of surveillance photographs. "What the hell is going on here?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Rebecca stood up, her spine straight and her voice steady. "I know about Sarah," she said. "I know about the baby. And I know you've been lying to me for months." James's face crumpled, and Christoph realized he was witnessing the destruction of a marriage that had been built on love and trust and destroyed by secrets and lies. But more importantly, he realized that someone had been orchestrating all of this destruction. Someone who knew about James's affair, about Debbie's financial problems, about the wedding, about everything. Someone who was playing a much larger game than any of them had realized. And Christoph was beginning to suspect he knew who it was. Chapter 5. Unraveling Truth. Sometimes the person you trust most is the one holding the knife behind your back. The Metropolitan Museum's Egyptian wing felt like a tomb at noon on a Tuesday, with only a handful of tourists wandering between the ancient sarcophagi and golden artifacts. Nina Lilly stood before the Temple of Dendur, its sandstone blocks reassembled under a wall of glass that overlooked Central Park, and tried to calm her racing heart. The mysterious text had been specific: "Come alone. Don't tell anyone." But Nina had spent the morning questioning whether she was walking into a trap. Too many secrets had surfaced in the past 48 hours. Too many lies had been exposed, and she was beginning to feel like a chess piece being moved around a board by an invisible player. "Miss Lilly?" Nina turned to find a woman approaching from behind a display case of canopic jars. She was in her 50s, impeccably dressed in a navy suit, with silver hair pulled back in a perfect chignon. She carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to power, and her sharp blue eyes missed nothing. "I'm Victoria Ashworth," the woman said, extending a manicured hand. "I believe we need to talk." Nina recognized the name immediately. Victoria Ashworth was one of Manhattan's most prominent philanthropists, a widow who'd inherited her late husband's real estate empire and had spent the past decade using her wealth and influence to support causes ranging from women's rights to environmental protection. She was also one of the biggest donors to Nina's law firm's pro bono work. "Mrs. Ashworth," Nina said, accepting the handshake, "I wasn't expecting... did you send me that text?" "I did. And please, call me Victoria. We have a great deal to discuss, and I'm afraid most of it is quite unpleasant." Victoria gestured toward a bench positioned to face the temple. As they sat, Nina noticed that the older woman's hands were trembling slightly, a sign of either nervousness or anger. "How do you know about my sister?" Nina asked directly. "Because I've been watching your family for several months now," Victoria replied. "More specifically, I've been investigating a pattern of fraud and extortion that seems to center around the people you're closest to." Nina felt her stomach drop. "Fraud?" Victoria opened her designer handbag and pulled out an iPad. She swiped through several screens before handing it to Nina. "These are financial records. Payments made from various shell companies to your friend Debbie White, your sister Sarah, and several other individuals over the past year." Nina studied the screen, trying to make sense of the numbers and dates. "I don't understand. What kind of payments?" "Blackmail payments," Victoria said simply. "Someone has been systematically gathering compromising information about wealthy, prominent New Yorkers and then using that information to extort money from them." "And you think my sister and Debbie are involved?" "I think they're victims who became accomplices," Victoria corrected. "The real question is who's running the operation." Nina looked up from the iPad. "Why are you telling me this? What's your connection to all of this?" Victoria's expression grew pained. "Because my son was one of the first victims." "Your son?" "Michael Ashworth. He's a federal prosecutor who was being blackmailed over an affair he had 3 years ago. The blackmailer demanded money to keep quiet about the affair, threatening to destroy his career and his marriage if he didn't pay." Nina remembered reading about Michael Ashworth in the legal newspapers. He was a rising star in the U.S. Attorney's Office, known for his work prosecuting white-collar crimes. "Did he pay?" "For a while, yes. $5,000 a month for 18 months. But then the demands increased and he realized it would never end. So he came to me for help." Victoria took back the iPad and swiped to a new screen. "This is where it gets interesting. The bank accounts receiving the payments? They were set up using false identities, but the person who set them up made a mistake. They used an address that traced back to a legitimate business." "What business?" "A photography studio in Soho, owned by Debbie White." Nina felt the blood drain from her face. Debbie's studio. The same studio that's been facing eviction for months. The same studio that suddenly had its rent paid in full 3 weeks ago. Victoria leaned forward. "Nina, I think your friend has been running a blackmail operation out of her business. And I think your wedding was supposed to be her biggest score yet." "But that doesn't make sense. Why would she destroy my wedding? Why hurt me like that?" "Because I don't think you were the target," Victoria said quietly. "I think Christoph was. Think about it, a tech billionaire with a squeaky clean reputation, about to marry a prominent civil rights attorney. If someone could manufacture a scandal involving him, especially one that included pregnancy and infidelity, they could demand millions to make it go away." Nina's mind raced through the events of the past few days. But the plan backfired because Christoph didn't try to pay her off quietly. He denied everything publicly. Exactly. Which means Debbie had to improvise, and that's when things got messy. Victoria showed Nina another screen on the iPad. "These are phone records from the past week. Look at this pattern of calls between Debbie's phone and another number." Nina studied the call log. Starting a week before the wedding, there had been dozens of calls between Debbie and an unknown number. The calls had increased in frequency right up until the morning of the wedding. Who's the other number? That's what I've been trying to figure out. It's registered to a corporation called Manhattan Holdings, LLC. But when I tried to trace the ownership, I hit a wall. Multiple layers of shell companies and offshore accounts. Someone with serious money and serious resources, Nina murmured. Someone who's been very careful to cover their tracks. But Nina, I think there's something else you need to know. About your sister. Victoria pulled up a new set of documents. Sarah's been receiving payments too. Not from the same accounts as Debbie, but from related sources. And the payments started right around the time she began her affair with James Patterson. You know about James? I know about all of it. The affair, the pregnancy, the lies. But I also know something else. Someone's been feeding Sarah information about James's business dealings with Christoph. Confidential information that could be used for insider trading or corporate espionage. Nina stared at the documents, feeling sick. Sarah's been spying on James. I think she's been recruited to spy on him. The affair might have been genuine at first, but someone turned it into an opportunity to gather intelligence about Christoph's company. But why? What would anyone want with information about Christoph's business? Victoria's expression grew grim. Because your fiancé is about to close a deal that could be worth billions. The pharmaceutical company he's acquiring has been working on breakthrough treatments for rare diseases. If someone could manipulate the stock price or sabotage the acquisition. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Nina understood. The wedding disaster, the pregnancy scandal, the business secrets, it was all connected. Someone had been orchestrating a campaign to destroy Christoph's reputation and business empire. Mrs. Ashworth, Victoria, who do you think is behind this? I have a theory, Victoria said, but I need more evidence before I can prove it. What I can tell you is that whoever it is has resources, connections, and intimate knowledge of all your personal lives. Nina's phone buzzed with a text message. This time it was from a number she recognized. Debbie's phone. Nina, I'm so sorry for everything. Meet me at the photography studio tonight at 8 p.m. I'll tell you everything, I promise. Come alone. Victoria read the message over Nina's shoulder. It's a trap. Maybe, but it might also be my only chance to get answers. Nina, these people have already shown they're willing to destroy lives to get what they want. If you go to that studio, then I'll make sure I'm not going alone, Nina said, standing up. Mrs. Ashworth, I need you to call someone for me. I need you to call Christoph. As they walked out of the Egyptian wing, past the ancient artifacts and timeless treasures, Nina realized that her life had become an archaeological dig of sorts. She was excavating layers of secrets and lies, trying to uncover the truth buried beneath years of deception. But unlike the archaeologists who had carefully unearthed the temple stone by stone, Nina was running out of time. The truth was buried somewhere in that photography studio, and she was going to dig it up tonight, even if it killed her. Chapter 6. First Revelation. The moment you think you understand the game, someone changes all the rules. The Soho photography studio felt like a museum of broken dreams at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday night. Debbie White's workspace was a chaos of expensive equipment mixed with unpaid bills, stunning fashion photographs hanging next to eviction notices, and the lingering scent of developer chemicals and desperation that clung to everything like invisible smoke. Nina Lilly stood in the doorway, her finger hovering over her phone's speed dial for Christoph. She'd promised Victoria Ashworth that she wouldn't go in alone, but the studio appeared empty, and she was tired of being afraid of her oldest friend. After everything that had happened, after all the lies and betrayals and shocking revelations, she needed to look Debbie in the eye and hear the truth. The studio itself told a story of dreams deferred and ambitions crushed. Expensive Profoto lighting equipment stood unused, covered in dust that suggested months of neglect. Fashion photographs from more successful times lined the walls. stunning black and white portraits of models and celebrities that had once graced the pages of Vogue and Harper's Bazaar. But interspersed between these artistic triumphs were stark reminders of financial reality: past due notices, collection agency letters, and a prominent eviction warning taped to the front desk. "Debbie," she called out, her voice echoing in the high-ceiling space. "I'm here." A light flickered on in the back of the studio, illuminating the small office where Debbie handled the business side of her photography work. Nina could see her silhouette through the frosted glass door, sitting hunched over what appeared to be a desk covered in papers and what looked like legal documents. The shadow seemed smaller somehow, diminished, like someone who'd been carrying an unbearable weight for too long. "In here," Debbie's voice called, sounding strained and tired in a way that Nina had never heard before. There was a hollow quality to it, as if the fight had gone out of her completely. Nina made her way through the studio, past the professional lighting equipment and backdrop stands that had once represented Debbie's dreams of becoming the next Annie Leibovitz or Richard Avedon. The equipment was top of the line: soft boxes and strobes that cost thousands of dollars, cameras that were worth more than most people's cars, but everything was covered in a thin layer of dust that suggested it hadn't been used in weeks. She noticed details she'd missed on previous visits. The way the expensive hardwood floors were scuffed and stained, the way the once pristine white walls showed signs of water damage from a leak that had never been properly repaired, the way the whole space felt like a beautiful shell that was slowly crumbling from within. She pushed open the office door and found Debbie sitting behind her desk, but she wasn't alone. Sarah Lilly sat in the chair across from her, her face streaked with tears and her hands protectively cradling her obviously pregnant belly. The sight of her sister, Sarah, who was supposed to have the flu, who'd missed the most important day of Nina's life, hit Nina like a physical blow. The office was cramped and cluttered, dominated by a cheap desk that looked out of place among the expensive photography equipment. File cabinets lined the walls, their drawers slightly open, as if someone had been searching through them hastily. Papers were scattered across every surface: invoices, contracts, bank statements, and what appeared to be medical records. "Sarah?" Nina gasped, her voice cracking with a mixture of relief and anger. "What are you doing here?" "Telling the truth," Sarah said, her voice hollow with exhaustion and guilt. "Finally telling the truth about everything." Her pregnancy was more advanced than Nina had realized. She had to be at least 6 months along, which meant she'd been hiding this from the family for far longer than Nina had imagined. Debbie looked up, and Nina was shocked by her appearance. Her usually perfect makeup was smeared, revealing the dark circles under her eyes and the stress lines that makeup had been hiding for months. Her hair was disheveled, and her eyes held the wild look of someone who'd been pushed beyond their breaking point and was teetering on the edge of complete collapse. Her hands shook as she reached for a glass of water, and Nina noticed that her wedding manicure was chipped and neglected. "Sit down, Nina," Debbie said, gesturing to a third chair that had been placed strategically in front of the desk. "There's so much you need to know. So much I should have told you months ago." Her voice carried the weight of someone who'd been carrying secrets for too long. Nina remained standing, her legal instincts telling her to maintain a position of strength. The fluorescent overhead light cast harsh shadows across all their faces, making the small office feel like an interrogation room. "I've been learning a lot lately, like how you've been running a blackmail operation out of this studio." Debbie's laugh was bitter and humorless, the sound of someone who'd lost the ability to find anything amusing in life. "Blackmail operation? Is that what Victoria Ashworth told you?" There was resignation in her voice, as if she'd been expecting this confrontation for weeks. "You know about Victoria?" "I know about everyone who's been digging into my business," Debbie replied, her voice carrying a weariness that spoke of sleepless nights and constant fear. Just like I know that Christoph has been investigating me, and James has been trying to figure out who knows about his affair, and you've been playing detective all over Manhattan." Sarah leaned forward in her chair, her pregnancy making the movement awkward. "Nina, you have to understand, none of this was supposed to happen the way it did." Her voice carried the pleading tone of someone desperate to be understood. "What way was it supposed to happen?" Nina demanded, her courtroom training making her voice sharp and accusatory. "You destroy my wedding, humiliate the man I love, and drag our family into some criminal conspiracy. What was the acceptable version of this nightmare?" "It wasn't supposed to be criminal," Sarah exploded, her composure finally cracking completely. "It was supposed to be... God, I don't even know what it was supposed to be anymore." She pressed her hands to her belly protectively, as if shielding her unborn child from the consequences of her choices. Debbie opened a desk drawer and pulled out a thick manila folder, its contents bulging with what appeared to be months of accumulated evidence. The folder was worn and creased, as if it had been handled countless times. "Here," she said, sliding it across the desk with trembling hands. "This is everything. All the files, all the evidence, all the truth you've been looking for." Nina opened the folder and found herself looking at copies of medical records, bank statements, photographs, and what appeared to be a detailed timeline of events going back several months. The organization was meticulous, almost obsessive, as if someone had been documenting every detail of a complex plan. There were also what appeared to be signed contracts, email printouts, and photographs taken with telephoto lenses. "The pregnancy test you found," Debbie began, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was mine, but not for the baby I claimed to be carrying at your wedding." She looked down at her hands, unable to meet Nina's eyes. "I don't understand." "I was pregnant 6 months ago," Debbie continued, tears starting to flow down her cheeks. "The father was someone I'd been seeing casually, a married man who made it very clear that he wanted nothing to do with me or a baby. He offered to pay for an abortion and then disappear from my life forever." Her voice broke completely on the last words. Nina felt her heart constrict with sympathy, despite everything that had happened. "Debbie, why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was ashamed. Because I was broke. Because I was falling apart, and I didn't want you to see me like that." Debbie's voice gained strength from anger at herself. "But someone found out about the pregnancy, about the abortion, about everything. Someone who'd been watching me, investigating me, waiting for the right moment to use my desperation against me." "Who?" Sarah and Debbie exchanged a look that was heavy with shared guilt and fear, the kind of look that passed between co-conspirators who'd gotten in far deeper than they'd ever intended. It was a look that spoke of sleepless nights spent wondering how they'd gotten so lost. "Someone who offered us a way out of our problems," Sarah said quietly, her voice barely audible above the hum of the fluorescent lights. "Someone who promised that if we helped them gather information about the people in your life, they'd make our troubles go away. They seemed so legitimate, so professional. It felt like consulting work, not what it became." Nina sank into the chair, overwhelmed by the scope of the deception. The cheap office chair creaked under her weight, and she noticed that one of its wheels was broken. "What kind of information?" "Business secrets from James," Sarah admitted, her voice barely audible. "Personal details about you and Christoph, financial information, legal cases you were working on, plans for the wedding, anything that might be useful." She paused, looking down at her hands. "At first it seemed harmless. James would tell me things about work, and I would mention them to Debbie, and she would pass them along. We thought we were just reporting." "You were spying on us?" "Not spying," Debbie protested, though her voice lacked conviction, "just reporting. Sarah would tell me things she learned from James, and I would tell them what I observed when we had dinner together or when you talked about work. It seemed harmless at first, just casual conversation that we were being paid to remember. Them? Who's them? Debbie pulled out another document from the folder, a formal contract printed on expensive letterhead. Her hands shook as she handled it, as if the paper itself were toxic. "This is a contract I signed. Look at the signature at the bottom." Nina examined the paper with the careful attention she'd give to evidence in a court case. It was a formal agreement for consulting services that promised Debbie $25,000 in exchange for discreet intelligence gathering regarding the personal and professional activities of specified individuals. The language was carefully crafted to sound legitimate while being vague enough to avoid specific criminal liability. There were multiple pages with detailed schedules of payments and specific information requests. The signature at the bottom was illegible, but the letterhead at the top made her blood run cold. "Patterson and Associates," she read aloud, her voice rising with disbelief. "But that's James's old law firm," Sarah finished, her voice hollow with the weight of revelation, "before he went into business with Christoph. But James doesn't work there anymore. He hasn't worked there in 5 years. "No," Debbie said, "but his former partner does. Rebecca Patterson's brother." She pulled out a photograph of a man in an expensive suit standing outside a Manhattan office building. "This is him. This is the man who recruited me." Nina stared at the document, her mind reeling as pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with devastating clarity. Rebecca's brother? But Rebecca's maiden name was Morrison, not Patterson. "She took James's name when they got married," Sarah explained, her voice gaining confidence as she finally told the truth. "But her brother kept using the Patterson name for the law firm because it had brand recognition and existing client relationships. His real name is David Morrison." "David Morrison," Nina repeated, the name triggering a flood of memories. "Wait. I know that name. He's been trying to poach clients from my firm for years. We've been in competition for several major cases, and his tactics have always seemed aggressive." "And he's been losing," Debbie said, pulling out a stack of financial documents. "Badly. His firm is hemorrhaging money, and he's been looking for ways to get an edge over the competition. These are his firm's financial statements. He showed them to me to explain why he needed the information so badly." The pieces were starting to come together in Nina's mind, but the picture they formed was even more disturbing than she'd imagined. The scope of the conspiracy was far larger than she'd thought, involving not just personal betrayals, but professional sabotage and financial fraud on a massive scale. "So David Morrison recruited you to spy on me to get insider information about my cases?" "At first," Sarah admitted, her voice breaking with shame. "But then he found out about my affair with James, and the scope of the operation expanded dramatically. He said he could use the affair as leverage, as a way to get even better information." "Expanded how?" Debbie pulled out a photograph and placed it on the desk with shaking hands. It showed Sarah and James entering a hotel, but the angle and lighting suggested it had been taken by a professional photographer using expensive equipment and telephoto lenses. There were timestamps and location data printed on the bottom of the image. He wanted compromising photos of the affair. He said he might need leverage over James if Christoph's business deals started affecting his own interests. Debbie's voice was barely a whisper now. "He had people following them, documenting everything. There are dozens of photos." "But then you got pregnant," Nina said to Sarah, her voice heavy with understanding. "And everything changed." Sarah nodded, tears flowing freely now. "Morrison saw an opportunity to create an even bigger scandal, one that would destroy both Christoph's reputation and his business empire. He said the pregnancy was perfect. It gave him a weapon he could use against all of you." Nina looked at Debbie, the final pieces of the puzzle falling into place with sickening clarity. "So the plan was for you to claim you were pregnant with Christoph's baby?" The plan was for me to privately approach Christoph and demand money to keep quiet about the affair, Debbie explained, her voice breaking with the weight of her confession. Morrison thought he'd pay quietly to avoid scandal. He said tech billionaires always paid to make problems go away, but when Christoph didn't respond to the initial approach, you panicked and decided to go public at the wedding. I was supposed to wait until after the honeymoon, Debbie said, tears flowing freely now. Morrison wanted me to give Christoph time to think about the blackmail demand, to let the pressure build. But the morning of your wedding, Sarah called me crying about how guilty she felt about everything, and I couldn't stand the thought of watching you marry him while keeping such a huge secret. Nina stood up and began pacing the small office, her mind racing through the implications while her heart broke for everyone involved. So you destroyed my wedding to ease your conscience? I destroyed your wedding because I thought I was protecting you, Debbie shouted, her voice cracking with pain and desperation. I thought Christoph was going to pay the blackmail money, which would mean he was guilty of something, and I couldn't let you marry someone who was hiding things from you. But he wasn't hiding anything. I know that now, Debbie said quietly, her voice barely audible. But by then it was too late. The damage was done, and Morrison was furious. He said I'd ruined everything, that I'd forced his hand. Nina's phone rang, and Christoph's name appeared on the screen. She answered immediately, her heart racing with a mixture of relief and fear. Nina, thank God. His voice was urgent and filled with concern. Where are you? I'm at Debbie's studio with her and Sarah. Christoph, there's so much. You need to get out of there. Now Victoria Ashworth just called me with information about David Morrison. He's been embezzling money from his clients to fund this whole operation, and he's desperate. The FBI is involved now, and if he thinks you're going to expose him... The lights in the studio suddenly went out, plunging them into darkness. Nina heard Sarah gasp, and Debbie's chair scrape against the floor. Nina? Christoph's voice came through the phone. Nina, what's happening? From somewhere in the darkness of the studio, they heard the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, purposeful, and a voice that Nina recognized with growing dread. Good evening, ladies. I think it's time we had a proper conversation. Chapter 7. Deeper Deceptions. In the dark, everyone becomes a stranger, even the people you've known your whole life. The emergency lighting cast eerie shadows through Debbie's photography studio as David Morrison stepped into the office doorway, his silhouette backlit like a villain in a film noir. Nina could see that he was holding something in his right hand, though she couldn't make out what it was in the dim light. Mr. Morrison, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. This is unexpected. Is it? Morrison moved into the room, and Nina could see that he was holding a small digital recorder. I've been listening to your conversation for the past 10 minutes. Very illuminating. Debbie stood up from behind her desk, her hands shaking. David, you said you just wanted information. You never said anything about threatening people. Plans change, Debbie, Morrison replied, his voice calm and controlled, especially when people start involving federal prosecutors' mothers in private investigations. Nina realized he was talking about Victoria Ashworth. How do you know about Victoria? Because I make it my business to know everything about the people who might interfere with my work, Morrison said. Just like I know that your boyfriend is probably on his way here right now, along with whoever else you've managed to involve in this mess. Nina's phone was still connected to Christoph, and she hoped he was listening. What do you want, Morrison? What I've always wanted. To protect my interests and eliminate the threats to my business. Morrison moved closer, and Nina could see his face clearly now. He was younger than she'd expected, probably in his early 40s, with the kind of sharp features and expensive suit that screamed Manhattan lawyer. But his eyes held something cold and calculating that made her skin crawl. Your law firm has been stealing my clients for 3 years, he continued. Taking cases that should have been mine, undercutting my fees, using your reputation to make me look second-rate." "That's called competition," Nina said. "It's legal." "Legal, yes, but not very profitable for me." Morrison's smile was humorless. "So I decided to level the playing field. If I couldn't beat you in court, I'd have to find another way to win." Sarah, who had been silent since Morrison's arrival, finally spoke up. "You told me this was just about gathering information. You never said you were planning to destroy people's lives." "I told you what you needed to hear to get your cooperation," Morrison replied without looking at her, "just like I told Debbie what she needed to hear, and James what he needed to hear." "James knows about this?" Nina asked. "James has been feeding me information about Christoph's business deals for months," Morrison said. "Not willingly, of course, but when a man is having an affair with his business partner's future sister-in-law, he becomes very motivated to cooperate when someone threatens to expose that affair to his wife and his partner." Nina felt sick. "You've been blackmailing James." "I prefer to think of it as mutually beneficial information sharing," Morrison said. "James kept his secret safe, and I got advance notice about which pharmaceutical companies Christoph was planning to acquire, so I could make some very profitable stock trades." "That's insider trading. That's a federal crime." "Only if someone can prove it, and the only people who knew about it were James, who won't talk because it would expose his affair, and Christoph, who doesn't even know that James was sharing information." Debbie sank back into her chair. "You used all of us." "I gave all of you what you wanted," Morrison corrected. "Sarah wanted money to support her pregnancy without having to tell her family about the affair. I paid her $20,000 for the information she provided. Debbie wanted her debts paid and her business saved. I handled that too. James wanted his affair kept secret. Done." "And what did you want in return?" Nina asked. "Initially, just inside information about your cases and Christoph's business deals, but then the scope of the operation evolved." Morrison moved to the window and peered through the blinds at the street below. "When I realized how close you and Christoph were getting to marriage, I saw an opportunity for something bigger. A tech billionaire's wedding scandal would be front-page news for weeks. His stock price would plummet, his business deals would fall through, and his reputation would be destroyed." "But why? What did any of that accomplish for you?" Morrison turned back to face her. "Because Christoph's pharmaceutical acquisition was going to put my biggest client out of business. MedTech Solutions was developing treatments that would directly compete with medications produced by Morrison Pharmaceuticals, a company that's been paying my firm millions in legal fees for the past decade." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place in Nina's mind. "So you orchestrated the wedding scandal to tank Christoph's reputation and sabotage the acquisition?" "Exactly. With Christoph's credibility destroyed and his company's stock price in free fall, MedTech would pull out of the deal. Morrison Pharmaceuticals would maintain their market dominance, and my firm would continue to receive their very generous retainer." "But the plan backfired," Nina said. "Christoph didn't try to pay off Debbie quietly. He denied everything publicly and demanded proof." "Which is why we're having this conversation," Morrison replied. "The original plan is no longer viable. I need a new approach." "What kind of new approach?" Morrison pulled out his phone and showed Nina the screen. It was a photo of Christoph entering the building downstairs, along with what appeared to be several police officers. "The kind where everyone in this room disappears permanently, and the evidence of my involvement disappears with them." Sarah gasped and pressed her hands to her pregnant belly. "You can't be serious." "I'm very serious," Morrison said. "I've invested too much time and money in this operation to let it fall apart now, and I certainly can't let Nina walk out of here with enough information to destroy my career and send me to federal prison." Nina's mind raced, looking for options. The office had only one door, and Morrison was blocking it. The window was too high to escape through, and even if they could get out that way, Sarah was too pregnant to move quickly. "David," Debbie said, her voice pleading, "you don't have to do this. We can work something out. We can what, Debbie? Pretend this never happened. Go back to our normal lives and hope nobody asks any uncomfortable questions." Morrison shook his head. That ship sailed the moment Nina decided to play detective. Nina heard footsteps in the studio outside the office. Christoph's voice called out, "Nina? Are you in here?" Morrison's expression hardened. "Right on schedule." He moved to the office door and called out, "She's in here, Christoph. But before you come any closer, you should know that I'm holding a gun, and I have no problem using it if you try to be a hero." Nina's blood turned to ice. In the dim emergency lighting, she hadn't realized that what Morrison was holding was a weapon. "Let them go, Morrison," Christoph's voice came from somewhere in the studio. "This is between you and me." "Actually, it's between me and everyone who knows enough to put me in prison," Morrison replied. "Which unfortunately includes your fiancée, her sister, and her best friend." "The police are already on their way," Christoph called back. "Victoria Ashworth has been working with the FBI to build a case against you. They know about the insider trading, the blackmail, all of it." Morrison's face went pale. "She's lying." "No," Nina said quietly. "She's not. Victoria told me she had evidence of a financial crimes operation. She was already investigating you before any of this happened." For the first time since he'd entered the office, Morrison looked genuinely rattled. His hand tightened on the gun, and Nina could see sweat beading on his forehead. "Then I have nothing left to lose," he said. And in that moment, Nina realized that a desperate man with nothing left to lose was the most dangerous kind of enemy they could face. Chapter 8. The Real Truth. When the last lie crumbles, what's left is either salvation or destruction, sometimes both. The sound of sirens in the distance cut through the tension in Debbie's photography studio like a knife through silk. Morrison's head snapped toward the window, his grip tightening on the gun as red and blue lights began flashing against the building across the street. "You called the police," he accused, looking at Nina with murderous rage. "No," she said, raising her hands peacefully. "But Victoria Ashworth probably did when Christoph told her where I was going." "David," Debbie said, her voice trembling, "please don't do this. You have children. Rebecca told me you have 2 little girls." Morrison's face twisted with pain and fury. "You think I don't know what this will do to my daughters? You think I haven't thought about what happens to them when their father goes to federal prison for the rest of his life?" "It doesn't have to end that way," Nina said, taking a small step forward. "We can work something out. I'm a lawyer. I know how these things work. If you cooperate, if you help make this right." "Help make it right?" Morrison laughed bitterly. "Nina, do you have any idea how far this goes? How many people are involved? How much money is at stake? Tell me." Morrison looked at her for a long moment, then seemed to make a decision. "The Morrison Pharmaceuticals retainer isn't just about legal fees. I've been helping them suppress research about the side effects of their medications, burying lawsuits, intimidating witnesses, bribing FDA officials." Nina felt her stomach drop. "People have died because of this, haven't they?" "Hundreds of people," Morrison admitted. "Maybe thousands. The arthritis medication they manufacture has been causing heart attacks and strokes for 5 years, but we've managed to keep it off the market long enough for them to make billions in profits." Sarah pressed her hand to her mouth, looking like she was going to be sick. "Oh my God, David, I never knew. I never would have helped you if I'd known people were dying." "Which is exactly why I didn't tell you," Morrison replied. "Just like I didn't tell Debbie that the photography clients I was sending her were money laundering fronts, or that the medical records she was helping me access belonged to dead patients." Nina's legal mind was racing, calculating the scope of the criminal enterprise Morrison was describing. This isn't just about insider trading or blackmail. This is conspiracy, murder, federal corruption. And now you understand why I can't let any of you walk out of here alive." The footsteps outside the office were getting closer. Nina could hear Christoph's voice directing what sounded like multiple police officers through the studio. "Morrison!" Christoph called out. "The building is surrounded. There's no way out. Let's end this before anyone gets hurt." "Before anyone gets hurt?" Morrison shouted back. "It's too late for that, Christoph. People have already been hurt. People have already died, and more people are going to die tonight." "David," a new voice called from the studio. Nina recognized it as Victoria Ashworth. "This is Victoria. I'm here with Agent Jennifer Walsh from the FBI. We want to make a deal with you." Morrison's eyes darted between the office door and the window. "What kind of deal?" "Full immunity in exchange for testimony against Morrison Pharmaceuticals and their co-conspirators. We know you're not the only lawyer involved in this. We know there are federal officials, pharmaceutical executives, research scientists. We want all of them. And in exchange, you walk away from this. New identity, witness protection, a chance to start over somewhere else with your daughters." Nina watched Morrison's face as he processed the offer. For a moment, she thought he might actually consider it, but then his expression hardened again. "You're lying," he called back. "There's no deal good enough to make this go away. I'm looking at life in prison, no matter what I do." "David," Victoria's voice was gentler now, almost maternal. "I know about your wife's medical bills. I know about the experimental cancer treatment that insurance wouldn't cover. I know why you started taking money from Morrison Pharmaceuticals in the first place." Morrison's face crumpled, and for the first time, Nina saw him not as a criminal mastermind, but as a desperate father who'd made terrible choices to save someone he loved. "She died anyway," he whispered. "I did all of this, and she died anyway." "But your daughters are still alive," Victoria continued, "and they need their father. Not in prison, not dead in some photography studio in Soho, but alive and free and able to take care of them." Nina seized the moment. "David, let us help you. Let us help you make the right choice for your girls." Morrison looked at her, then at Sarah and Debbie, then at the gun in his hand. "The right choice," he repeated numbly. "I'm not sure I remember how to make those anymore." The office door suddenly burst open, and Christoph stepped inside, followed by 2 FBI agents with their weapons drawn. Morrison spun toward them, raising his gun, but Nina moved faster. "David, no!" she shouted, throwing herself between Morrison and the agents. The gun went off. The sound was deafening in the small office, and for a moment, everyone froze. Nina felt a burning sensation along her left arm and realized she'd been grazed by the bullet. But she was alive, and more importantly, Morrison had dropped the gun and was now on his knees, sobbing. "I'm sorry," he kept repeating. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." As the FBI agents secured Morrison and paramedics rushed in to tend to Nina's wound, she found herself thinking about the chain of events that had led them all to this moment. A dying wife, mounting medical bills, a pharmaceutical company willing to pay any price to protect their profits, and a network of corruption that reached into the highest levels of government and business. "Nina," Christoph knelt beside her as the paramedic cleaned her wound. "Are you okay?" She looked at him, this man she'd almost lost because of lies and manipulation, and realized that somehow, through all the deception and betrayal, they'd found their way back to the truth. "I'm okay," she said. "We're all going to be okay." But as she watched Morrison being led away in handcuffs, his life destroyed by choices he'd made in desperation and grief, she wondered if any of them would ever really be the same. The real truth, she realized, wasn't just about who was lying and who was telling the truth. It was about the terrible things people were capable of when they felt they had no other choice. And it was about the power of love and forgiveness to survive even the worst betrayals. Chapter 9. Confrontation title. At her wedding, Millionaire's maid of honor stood up and announced she's pregnant with her husband's child. Sometimes the only way to save what you love is to fight for it, even when the battle feels impossible to win. The FBI field office in Federal Plaza felt like a different world compared to the chaos of the photography studio. Nina sat in a sterile conference room, her left arm in a sling, watching through one-way glass as David Morrison was being interrogated by federal agents. The bandage on her arm was a small price to pay for being alive, but the emotional wounds from the past week were going to take much longer to heal. Christoph sat beside her, his hand gently resting on her uninjured arm. They hadn't talked much since the arrest. There had been too many statements to give, too many questions to answer, too many pieces of a criminal conspiracy to untangle. But now, in the quiet of the conference room, they finally had a chance to confront everything that had been left unsaid. "I should have told you about Atlanta," Christoph said quietly. "About the medtech acquisition, about why I couldn't discuss it. If I'd been honest from the beginning." "None of this would have happened anyway," Nina replied. "Morrison would have found another way to sabotage the deal, and Debbie and Sarah still would have been vulnerable to his manipulation." Through the glass, they could see Morrison's lawyer, a public defender who looked overwhelmed by the scope of the case, trying to negotiate some kind of plea agreement. Agent Walsh had already explained that Morrison's cooperation could bring down a criminal network that spanned multiple states and involved dozens of conspirators. "How do you forgive something like this?" Nina asked, not really expecting an answer. "How do you forgive your best friend for destroying your wedding? How do you forgive your sister for betraying your trust? How do you forgive yourself for not seeing what was happening right in front of you?" "I don't think forgiveness is about forgetting," Christoph said. "I think it's about choosing to love people despite their mistakes, and choosing to believe that people can change." Nina looked at him, this man who'd been accused of terrible things in front of hundreds of people, who'd had his reputation dragged through the mud, who'd lost the woman he loved because of other people's lies. "How are you not angry?" "I was angry," Christoph admitted. "For about 12 hours, I was angrier than I've ever been in my life. But then I realized that Morrison didn't destroy us, Nina. We're still here. We're still us. Everything that matters survived." "Did it?" Nina asked, "because I don't feel like the same person who walked down that aisle 6 days ago. I feel like I don't know how to trust anyone anymore. Including me." Nina turned to face him fully. "I want to trust you. But Christoph, you lied to me about where you were. Maybe it was just business. Maybe it was harmless, but it was still a lie. And if you can lie about small things, then you're wondering what else I might lie about," he finished. "I understand that. And I understand if you need time to rebuild that trust." A knock on the conference room door interrupted them. Agent Walsh entered, followed by Victoria Ashworth and, to Nina's surprise, James Patterson. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Agent Walsh said, "but we need to discuss the status of the other individuals involved in this case." James looked terrible, hollow-eyed and pale, like he hadn't slept in days. When he saw Christoph, his face crumpled with shame. "Chris, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I never meant for any of this to happen. When Morrison first approached me about Sarah, I thought I could handle it. I thought I could give him some harmless information and keep my affair secret. I never imagined it would lead to all this." Christoph stood and walked over to his business partner and best friend. For a moment, Nina thought he might hit him. Instead, he pulled James into a hug. "We'll figure it out," Christoph said simply. "All of it. We'll figure it out together." Agent Walsh cleared her throat. "Mr. Patterson, based on your cooperation over the past 24 hours, the Bureau is prepared to offer you immunity from prosecution in exchange for your continued testimony against Morrison and his co-conspirators." "What about Rebecca?" James asked. "Does she have to know everything?" "She already knows. Victoria said gently. She's the one who called the FBI when she realized the scope of what Morrison was doing. Her private investigator wasn't just tracking your affair. He was documenting a federal crime. James sank into a chair, overwhelmed. She knows. About Sarah, about the baby, about everything. She knows. And she's filing for divorce, Victoria continued. But she's also the reason you're not going to prison. She could have let you burn with Morrison, but she chose to save you instead. Nina felt her heart break a little for Rebecca, sweet, loyal Rebecca, who'd spent years trying to get pregnant while her husband was creating a baby with another woman. Rebecca, who'd discovered not just infidelity, but criminal conspiracy, and who'd still found the strength to do the right thing. "Where's Sarah now?" Nina asked. "Safe house," Agent Walsh replied. "She's cooperating fully with our investigation, and we're providing protection until Morrison's associates are rounded up. The pharmaceutical company has resources and connections that make this a national security issue." "And Debbie?" "Also in protective custody. Her photography studio was being used as a money laundering operation without her knowledge. She's a victim in this, not a perpetrator." Nina stood and walked to the window overlooking the city. Somewhere out there, her sister was hiding from criminals who might want her dead. Her best friend was under federal protection. Her wedding had become evidence in a conspiracy case. Her life had been turned upside down by people she'd trusted. But she was alive. The people she loved were alive. And slowly, painfully, the truth was coming to light. "Agent Walsh," she said, turning back to the room, "when can I see Sarah?" "Soon. We're still processing some of the evidence from Morrison's office, but within the next few days we should be able to arrange supervised visits." "And Debbie?" "Same timeline. Ms. White has expressed a desire to speak with you, to explain her actions more fully. If you're willing to hear her out." Nina looked at Christoph, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes," she said. "I want to hear what she has to say. I want to understand how we got here." "There's one more thing," Victoria said, pulling out a folder. "The MedTech acquisition. With Morrison's conspiracy exposed, there's no longer any threat to the deal. The pharmaceutical treatments that Morrison Pharmaceuticals was trying to suppress, they could save thousands of lives." Christoph took the folder and flipped through it. The cancer medications, the arthritis treatments, all of this could have been available years ago if Morrison hadn't been burying the research. "Which is why it's more important than ever that this acquisition goes through," Victoria said. "Not just for your business, but for all the patients who need these treatments." Nina watched Christoph's face as he absorbed the information. This was why she'd fallen in love with him. Not just his success or his wealth, but his fundamental desire to make the world better. The pharmaceutical conspiracy had tried to destroy him, but instead, it had given him an opportunity to save lives on a scale he'd never imagined. "What about us?" she asked quietly. Christoph looked up from the folder. "What about us? Do we try again? Do we plan another wedding? Do we pretend the last week never happened?" "We don't pretend anything," Christoph said, setting down the folder and taking her hands in his. "We acknowledge that terrible things happened. We acknowledge that people we trusted betrayed us. We acknowledge that we both made mistakes and that we both have work to do to rebuild what was damaged. And then we decide whether what we have is worth fighting for." Nina looked around the conference room, at the federal agents and the lawyers, at the evidence of conspiracy and corruption, at the aftermath of the worst week of her life. Then she looked at Christoph, and she saw not just the man she'd almost married, but the man who'd stood by her through all of this chaos, who'd forgiven his best friend's betrayal, who'd been willing to risk his life to save hers. "It is," she said. "It's worth fighting for." "Even with everything that's happened?" "Especially with everything that's happened," Nina replied, "because if we can survive this, we can survive anything." As they embraced in that sterile conference room, surrounded by the debris of other people's crimes and mistakes, Nina realized that sometimes the strongest foundations are built not in perfect circumstances, but in the aftermath of destruction. They weren't the same people who'd stood at that altar a week ago. They'd been tested by fire and emerged changed, scarred, but somehow stronger. And they were ready to begin again. Chapter 10. Reunion. Some endings are actually beginnings in disguise. 6 months later, the Rainbow Room looked exactly the same as it had on that disastrous October day when Debbie White had shattered 300 guests' expectations with 2 sentences that changed everything. The same crystal chandeliers cast dancing light across the polished floors. The same floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of Manhattan, and the same sense of elegance and possibility filled the air. But the small gathering assembling there on this quiet Tuesday evening in April was nothing like the lavish wedding celebration that had ended in scandal and heartbreak. Only 12 people sat at the intimate table overlooking Central Park, and they were there not for a beginning, but for a different kind of closure. Nina Lilly, she'd kept her maiden name for now, smoothed her simple navy dress as she watched Christoph adjust his tie nervously. He'd insisted on wearing the same platinum cufflinks from their original wedding day, a gesture that had made her cry when she'd noticed them earlier. "Are you sure about this?" he asked for the 3rd time in an hour. "I'm sure," Nina replied, though her stomach was full of butterflies. "We need to do this, all of us, together." Across the room, Sarah Lilly cradled her 3-month-old son, Michael, against her shoulder. The baby had James Patterson's dark hair and Sarah's delicate features, and despite the circumstances of his conception, he was undeniably beautiful. Sarah had chosen to be a single mother, turning down James's offer of financial support and child custody in favor of raising Michael on her own terms. James sat with his new therapist, Dr. Angela Rodriguez, whom he'd been seeing twice a week since his divorce from Rebecca was finalized. He looked healthier than he had in months, though the weight of his mistakes still showed in his eyes. He'd resigned from the business he'd built with Christoph, choosing instead to take a position with a non-profit organization focused on pharmaceutical transparency. Rebecca Patterson, she'd taken back her maiden name, Morrison, though she'd legally changed it to Morrison Hayes to distinguish herself from her criminal brother, sat with Victoria Ashworth. The 2 women had become unlikely friends through their shared experience of discovering the truth about David Morrison's conspiracy. Rebecca had used her divorce settlement to start a foundation supporting families affected by pharmaceutical fraud, and there, in the chair closest to the window, sat Debbie White. Debbie looked different than she had 6 months ago. The designer clothes and perfect makeup had been replaced by simple jeans and a sweater. Her platinum hair had grown out to reveal its natural brown color, and her face carried lines that spoke of sleepless nights and difficult realizations. But her eyes, which had been wild and desperate that night in her photography studio, now held something Nina recognized as peace. "I think," Debbie said, looking around the table at the faces of the people whose lives she'd helped destroy, "I should start by saying what I should have said months ago. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the lies, for the betrayal, for the pain I caused all of you. I'm sorry for being too much of a coward to tell the truth when it mattered." "Debbie," Nina began, but Debbie held up a hand. "Please, let me finish, because this might be the last chance I have to say this properly." Debbie's voice was steady but emotional. "When David Morrison first approached me, I was drowning. My business was failing. I was facing bankruptcy, and I felt like I was watching my entire life collapse. When he offered me money to just observe things, to report back on conversations I'd naturally be part of anyway, it seemed harmless." Sarah shifted Michael to her other arm. "We all made choices we regret." "But my choices hurt people I claimed to love," Debbie continued. "Nina, You were the best friend I'd ever had, and I repaid your loyalty by destroying the most important day of your life. I stood up at your wedding and lied to 300 people because I was too scared to admit I'd gotten in over my head." Victoria leaned forward. "Debbie, you've already testified against Morrison and his associates. Your cooperation has helped put dangerous criminals in prison and potentially saved thousands of lives. You don't need to keep punishing yourself." "Yes, I do," Debbie said firmly, "because accountability isn't just about legal consequences. It's about acknowledging the human cost of what I did. It's about facing the people I hurt and accepting that some things can't be fixed with apologies." Nina reached across the table and took Debbie's hand. "Some things can't be fixed," she said quietly, "but that doesn't mean they can't be forgiven." "How?" Debbie asked, tears flowing freely now. "How do you forgive someone who betrayed you so completely?" "Because the alternative is carrying that anger forever," Nina replied. "And I refuse to let Morrison's conspiracy poison the rest of my life. I refuse to let his manipulation turn me into someone who can't trust or love or hope." Christoph stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights below. "When Nina first told me she wanted to arrange this dinner, I thought she was crazy. I thought it would be too painful, too difficult. But she was right. We needed to come together, all of us who were caught up in Morrison's web, and decide how we wanted to move forward." "As friends?" James asked hopefully. "As people who understand each other," Christoph corrected. "People who've seen the worst in each other and chosen to focus on the best." Dr. Rodriguez, who had been quietly observing the conversation, spoke for the first time. "Healing isn't about pretending trauma didn't happen. It's about integrating the experience into your story in a way that allows you to grow rather than be diminished by it." Sarah bounced Michael gently as he began to fuss. "I've been thinking a lot about stories lately. About the story I want to tell my son about how he came into the world. I don't want it to be a story of shame and secrecy. I want it to be a story about how people can make mistakes and still choose to do better." "What will you tell him about his father?" Rebecca asked gently. Sarah looked at James with something that might have been forgiveness. "I'll tell him that his father is a good man who made bad choices, but who owned up to those choices and tried to make amends. And I'll tell him that his father loves him, even though they can't be together." James wiped his eyes and nodded gratefully. Nina stood and raised her glass of sparkling water. "I want to make a toast," she said. "To the truth. It's messy and painful and complicated, but it's the only foundation worth building on." "To the truth," the others echoed, raising their glasses. As they drank, Nina felt a weight she'd been carrying for months finally begin to lift. The perfect wedding she'd planned had been destroyed, but something more valuable had taken its place, a deep understanding of what really mattered. "So," Victoria said with a mischievous smile, "when is the actual wedding?" Nina and Christoph exchanged glances and laughed. "Next month," Nina announced. "Small ceremony, immediate family only, on the beach in the Hamptons. No photographers, no press, no 300-person guest list. Just the people who really matter," Christoph added, looking around the table. "All of you are invited if you want to come." "Even me?" Debbie asked, her voice small. "Especially you," Nina said, "because you're the one who taught me that love isn't about perfect moments or flawless people. It's about choosing to stay together even when everything falls apart." As the evening wound down and the small group prepared to leave, Nina found herself standing at the same window where she'd posed for wedding photos 6 months ago. The view was the same, but everything else had changed. "Any regrets?" Christoph asked, joining her at the window. "About tonight? About forgiving them? About giving us another chance?" Nina considered the question seriously. "No regrets, but also no illusions. We're not the same people who almost got married here in October. We've all been through too much to pretend otherwise." "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" "It's a real thing," Nina said, "and real is all I want anymore." As they left the Rainbow Room together, walking past the spot where Debbie had made her devastating announcement, Nina realized that the most important truth she'd learned wasn't about who had lied or who had betrayed whom. It was about the difference between a perfect love story and a true one. Perfect love stories ended with fairy tale weddings and happily ever after promises. True love stories continued long after the wedding dress was put away, through the messy work of forgiveness and rebuilding and choosing each other every day, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. And as she and Christoph walked out into the Manhattan night, hand in hand, Nina knew that their true love story was just beginning.